The town of Shile lay where the Black Sea pressed endlessly against steep, stony cliffs, water dark like bruised glass and always restless, as though remembering an old violence. Its houses were low and faded, whitewashed walls cracked by salt wind. A lighthouse stood at the farthest edge of the coast, old enough that nobody remembered the year it was built, only that it had always been there, watching the tides. Selim had not meant to come back. Istanbul had been noisy enough to drown out memory, and that had been a comfort for years. But when his mother's letters stopped making sense, first skipping words, then forgetting days, he had packed a single suitcase and returned to the house where every door creaked the same way it had when he was a child. He tried to live quietly. Each morning he brewed tea for his mother, steadying her shaking hands. She stared at him with that thin, wavering look of someone who recognizes a face but not a name. Sometimes she smiled and called him Okonim, his brother's name. Selim never corrected her. He spent the afternoons repairing small things around the house, loose hinges, splintered chair legs, the shutter that banged in the wind. Familiar tasks requiring no thought. Thought was dangerous. In Shile, silence could grow teeth in your mind. The nights were the worst. The sea was loud then, as if something huge moved beneath it. Selim slept lightly and dreamed in unsettled fragments. He dreamed of the cliff path where he and Alkan had once chased each other, breathless and young. He dreamed of the lighthouse, its beam cutting through the dark like a blade. And he dreamed of the argument. They had been standing near the rocks, the tide rising fast. Selim couldn't remember what started the fight, only the heat of it, the sharp choking taste of words that could not be taken back. Okan had said, voice breaking, and Selim had gone. He woke some nights with salt on his lips. The villagers did not ask questions when he returned. They greeted him quietly, with a solemn nod or a hand placed briefly on his shoulder. Not out of coldness, but recognition. The sea took things from many families in Shile. Ooh. Some people learned to accept that. Others carried the loss like a second spine. 3 weeks after settling in, Selim found the bundle. He had been cleaning his childhood room, trying to air out the dampness that clung to the walls. When he shifted the bed frame, the floorboard beneath groaned and lifted slightly at the edge. Something tucked below it rattled softly. The parcel was wrapped in cloth the color of dried bone. Inside there were blackened rose petals, a lock of hair bound with thread, and a scrap of paper worn almost blank by time. Only 2 words still had shape to them. Alma Kanem, take my blood. Selim stood very still. The window behind him was open, and the sea wind blew into the room, cold enough to sting. But what chilled him more was the silence, how the house seemed to be waiting. He told himself it was nothing. Some relic of mourning. Someone's attempt to heal the past. But that night, for the first time in 10 years, he heard his brother's voice in his dreams. Soft. Close. He knows what you did. In the days that followed, Selim tried to convince himself that the bundle had been nothing more than an old grief ritual. Something his mother or grandmother had made in their sorrow. In Shile, people held onto customs older than scripture. Charms made of salt and thread. Whispers to the waves before fishing boats left shore. It should not have been surprising, but it felt wrong. The lock of hair was too recent, soft still, not brittle with age. The thread smelled faintly of smoke as though it had been burned and rewound. Selim tried to ignore the unease, but it clung to him like damp clothing. He found himself glancing at shadows, listening for footsteps on the floor above him, though the house had only 1 story. His mother's confusion worsened. Some morning she called him Okan in a tone that was too warm, too certain. But when he looked into her eyes, there was something like fear there. Not confusion, not dementia, fear. One afternoon, as he helped her wash her hands, she murmured in a low, frantic voice, close enough that he could feel her breath tremble against his cheek. He came last night. He stood by the door. I heard him breathing. Selim froze. Who, Anne? Who came? She closed her eyes, swallowed. Her fingers tightened around his wrist, surprisingly strong. Don't make me say the name. If you say it, it comes. She said nothing more for the rest of the day. The voice began 2 nights later. It was not a hallucination, not an imagined echo. Salim knew the difference. Aline knew the difference. This voice had texture, cadence, memory behind it. "Come with me," it said one night from the corner of his room, where shadows pooled deepest. "Look what waits in the tide." He sat up, gasping, the sheets damp with sweat, yet the window was open, and the cold wind felt like someone exhaling against his neck. The dreams became sharper. Not recollections, reconstructions. He saw the night of the drowning again and again, but the angles shifted. Sometimes he was watching from the rocks, sometimes from the water, sometimes through his brother's eyes. And more disturbingly, he remembered details he had not witnessed. The slick feel of dark seaweed brushing Okan's knees as he struggled, the exact taste of salt on his tongue. The thought fleeting, desperate, "He'll come back for me." Salim began losing time. He would wake standing at the kitchen sink, fingers deep in cold dishwater, or on the back steps, staring at the sea. Once, he found himself on the cliff path at sunrise, hands scraped raw, as though he had climbed there in a dream. The villagers watched him differently now. They did not ask questions, they only lowered their voices when he passed. One older fisherman avoided looking at him entirely, muttering a word under his breath, a Danusian, the one who was becoming. Selim did not understand, not yet, but he felt it. Something was shifting inside him. Not entering, not haunting, remembering. The past was no longer memory, it was inheritance. Something was waking up in his blood, something that was not finished with him. And every night the voice grew clearer, closer. "You walked away," it murmured, "and now come back." The realization came slowly, like recognizing a face you've seen every day but never truly looked at. It began with a memory Salim could not possibly have. He was sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a steaming glass of tea when he remembered. With perfect clarity, the scrape of Okan's thumbnail against his own wrist when they were boys, the tiny crescent mark it left, and the way Okan laughed, promising, "Even if we fight, we stay together." Blood doesn't forget. Salim dropped the tea glass. It shattered, scalding water spreading across the table, but he barely felt it. He remembered it as if he had lived inside Okan's skin. The boundary between his mind and his brother's was thinning. He sought out Sadiq because every trembling instinct in his body told him the answers were in the old lighthouse keeper's house. He climbed the cliff path at dusk, wind cutting at his face like knives of salt. The lighthouse windows glowed faint orange, like a watchful eye. Sadiq greeted him without surprise. He looked ill, though not weak. His body was thin, worn nearly translucent by sleeplessness and some terrible focus. But his gaze held a frightening clarity. Then to Salim and something behind him. "Why did you take that parcel?" Salim demanded. Along the walls were marks, not sigils or symbols meant for fear, but looping, deliberate shapes, drawn in iron-rich pigment, the color of dried blood. Sadiq didn't practice sorcery from books, nor from foreign rites. His magic was old, not mystical, but ancestral, passed down in whispers and gestures and debts of the heart. "My great-grandfather taught it," Sadiq said. "Not power over spirits. No, that is childish myth, but power over memory, lineage, and the shape of guilt." Salim stared at him. Azim stared at him. "Why me?" Sadiq stepped closer. "Because you left him." The words were simple, soft, but they struck like a blade sliding between ribs. Sadiq's expression did not hold hatred. It held devotion, a devotion so fervent it had rotted into cruelty. "He called for you," Sadiq continued. "He loved you." And when the water took him, his last thought was not fear. It was knowing you were not there. That ache lodged itself in the world. I did not summon a spirit. I simply gave that ache a body. Salim's knees weakened. "What have you done to me?" His voice was barely breath. "I only returned what belonged to him," Sadiq whispered. "His memories, his voice, his place in your life. You left him once. Now you will live him, forever." Salim felt it then. Not grief, not horror, but something sliding inside him, a shifting of identity. His brother's laughter echoing in the chambers of his mind, his own name dimming. Salim staggered back, but Sadiq only watched, serene. "You are not being haunted," he said gently. "You are being replaced." Outside, the sea roared, not loud but triumphant. The transformation did not happen all at once. It was not a possession. It was a slow drowning inside the self. Salim tried to resist at first. He barricaded his bedroom door at night, though he couldn't explain to himself what he believed it would keep out. He avoided mirrors, because sometimes when he passed one, he caught the echo of a different posture, a familiar half-smile that wasn't his. He stopped going into town. The sympathy in the villagers' eyes had changed to a quiet recognition, as though they were watching a tide roll toward shore, unstoppable, inevitable. His mother, her mind unraveling but her heart still unbearably clear, started calling him "oh" constantly now. There was no confusion in her voice anymore, just grief, freshly reopened, bleeding like it was new. One evening, she pressed her forehead to his chest and whispered, "I prayed every night for him to come back, and now I see my prayer was mistaken." Her hands shook, not from age, but from regret. Salim wanted to tell her he was still here. He wanted to say her son had not vanished yet. But when he opened his mouth, the voice that came out was wrong. Soft, warmer, a tone he had not used in years. "Anisim," he said, and he heard Okan say it. His mother's sob was so quiet it was almost lost to the wind. The sleepwalking returned. But there was no confusion to it now. He chose the path to the cliffs. The night he walked into the sea. The sky was cloudless, and the lighthouse beam cut the horizon in slow, patient arcs. She sat by the window each day, watching the shoreline, her gaze soft but vacant, waiting for something she no longer truly wanted to return. And on certain evenings when the water is calm and the last light slips behind the lighthouse, people say they see a figure standing just beyond the rocks, motionless, watching the land with patient, unblinking familiarity. Not a ghost, not a memory. A presence shaped by guilt, carried forward by intention, a name reclaimed. And now that you have heard this story, it knows exactly where to find you.